Third and final set of questions.
Mr. Speaker, this PC government went around the province in 2012 promising 120 school projects to be built before the next election. Well, Mr. Speaker, yesterday we find out only one has been built. Construction has literally been slower than a snail's pace. The Premier seems intent on pinning the blame on Albertans who expect the kids aren't packed in the classrooms like sardines. So I'll ask the Premier, how do you think Albertans can expect these schools to be built on time with the dismal PC record of keeping promises?
Yeah,
well, Mr. Speaker, there's been no more outspoken advocate about the need to catch up on our capital construction for schools than myself, Mr. Speaker, and I stand by that. The schools in question, the honourable member should be frank with Albertans. It takes 3.5 years to construct a school, Mr. Speaker. That's a minimum in terms of the time that it takes. The schools that were committed to in 2011, some 35 schools, 30 of those schools are in fact completed, Mr. Speaker. The schools that were announced in 2013, the 120 schools, 38 are under construction, 54 are in the design phase, and frankly another 26 are in the tender process. This is a process of a government building schools in a proper way, in a methodical way, in the best way possible, and on time and on budget, Mr. Speaker.
First supplemental in this section.
The Premier can try and run from his government's own record, but he can't hide. In October, the Premier called the state of school construction the most expansive commitment we've ever seen in Alberta's history. But that was when the Premier was buying his education minister a seat, and this is now. It's been 6 months since he announced 77 new schools, and guess what? Not a single shovel is in the ground on any of these projects. It's this time of electioneering and broken promises Albertans are sick of. Premier, when are you going to look in the mirror, clean up the mess, and admit you won't keep your promises that you made to Albertans?
Thank you. The point of order from the Government House Leader has been noted at 226. The Honourable Minister of Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, as the Premier has indicated, of the Phase 1 schools, Mr. Speaker, 30 are done. 2 additional schools, Mr. Speaker, have students in the schools today, Mr. Speaker. A further 2 are going to be ready in a very short period of time. Of the Phase 2 schools, Mr. Speaker, 38 are in construction today, 54 are in design, 26 are in the tender process, and of the Phase 3 schools, Mr. Speaker, that were announced last October, 12 of those schools, Mr. Speaker, have been expedited to have a target completion date of 2016.
Final supplemental, honourable member.
Now, Mr. Speaker, here is where the government isn't talking to each other. So I'm going to try and put some facts out, Premier and Infrastructure Minister. The Infrastructure Minister says it takes 12 to 18 months to build a new school. The Premier says 3 years. Wonder why people don't trust you? 6 months since you promised 77 new schools, 60 of them are still in the planning phase, 0 are in construction. Excuse the Albertans for their collective cynicism, but the stockpile of new school promises are beginning to rot. To the Premier, when are you going to stop announcing schools, re-announcing them, announcing them, and re-announcing them again?
The Honourable Minister of Infrastructure.
Speaker, with all due respect, my comments have been very clear on this matter. To construct an elementary school, it takes between 12 to 16 or 18 months for an elementary school, and that is just the construction phase, Mr. Speaker. That does not take into account the planning, Mr. Speaker, that happens with community groups, the design, Mr. Speaker, that has to take place on a specific site, testing the specific site conditions, Mr. Speaker, and let's not forget our municipal partners that we have to get permitting from, Mr. Speaker. That can take 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, or even 12 months, Mr. Speaker. The total process, about 3 to 3.5 years.
Thank you.